Greetings once again. I think that must have been a little less than 2 minutes since the last recording. After the doctor had seen me, I was obbed and swabbed and taken, placed on a bed on C3 and stayed the night there. They'd sorted out and increased my painkillers. One of the ladies nurses came to see me from the palliative care team, saw me that evening, which was wonderful. And she talked through increasing this painkiller and going on to this one and doing that and doing whatever for that night until we knew precisely what was wrong with me. Some people could give you several lists. So I was settled into bed. At that point I was feeling a lot more together, but still very frightened. The nurses there on C3 are absolutely remarkable. I was looked after by an agency nurse overnight, and Benny, who's one of the Filipino nurses, amazing gentleman who, when I said I was a Christian and I prayed and I have a faith, that kind of gave him the door for him to walk into, to be able to say that he was actually a pastor, and he didn't put his faith on me. Please don't misunderstand me on that. I had given him the open door for him to be able to give, and gave him permission, if you like, for him to share the fact that he was a Christian also. And that was a comfort to me, but also the agency nurse was lovely. She's talked to me about lots of stuff about her work, and as an agency nurse, the different places she had worked, and her training and what she wanted to do. I'm a very nosy person anyway, so I ask a lot of questions, as you probably gathered. But it was the fact that I was spoken to as a human being. There was no talking to me as if I was a patient. I am a patient. I was a patient. But I was spoken to as Gina Matthews. Almost as a friend, talking and sharing. My darling niece came and saw me as well, as she works on C4, and she worked on and that was a great comfort. She'd obviously gone on to C4, seen the handover, and come and seen me. That was a real good comfort. And another lady who used to come to my church came and saw me also after her shift. And the staff allowed them to come in and allowed them to give me a hug. They didn't stand at the door and say, "No, visiting hour's finished. You've got to stay back. You know, this nurse needs rest. This patient needs rest." They allowed them in to give me comfort and give me a hug. And that's another lesson to learn. Was that rules are rules. Rules are there to be obeyed, but can be pushed a little bit when you have a level of understanding with patients. That sometimes visiting hours don't have to be quite so strict. Sometimes you can allow a patient to have a hug from a friend who happens to be working in the hospital. I went to sleep that night and had catnapped. 5'1", I probably kitten napped all the way through all through the night. That makes me a very big cat. Never mind. But I catnapped through the night, and the agency nurse, I'm so sorry, I've forgotten her name, came and did my obs. But when they heard me groaning and moaning in my sleep, they didn't come over all the time. They just let me settle. They weren't there, oh my goodness. Bearing in mind the fact I was the only patient on that 4-bed ward that night. The following day I was transferred up to D3. And that's going to be the next podcast in a moment, as these have to be sort of very small. But what I want to pass on again is the communication. And not necessarily having to, making sure that the patient is given comfort, not smothered. Is spoken to as a human being, as themselves, as Gina Matthews, not as, "Oh, darling, sweetheart," or anything like that. Having said that, if that's your natural way of talking, "darling, sweetheart," then there's that balance. Some people have to learn not to be quite so darling sweetheart, but if that's your natural way of talking, then don't change who you are. Just be a bit more, just be sensitive to who the patient is and how you would want to be spoken to in a hospital as a human being as well. But also the fact of allowing other people in to add that extra hug. And to not smothering during the night, not smothering a patient, not going to them every 5 minutes every time you hear a groan, just letting them settle themselves. Okay? Tomorrow is a different story.